How's it going, everyone? So today, I get a lot of comments of how people don't want to take apart the carburetor because they don't want to mess with it. It's too complicated, yada yada yada. I'm here to explain to you that if you have something as simple as water or a plug jet, if it wasn't just super corroded, then you really can take apart your own carburetor and get it cleaned up. It's not hard, it takes very minimal tools, and it can save you quite a bit of time and money. So I have here are three, in my opinion, very common pressure washer, lawnmower, anything with that general size of motor carburetors. This is from a Honda. One's from like I think this might actually be from a lawnmower, I don't remember. But this style carburetor is by far the most popular, so we're going to be going through that one because this style is shared between, in fact, I'll show you. I mean, it's not exact, but see that blue pressure washer? Carb is almost exactly the same. That mower right there, carb is exactly the same. Now that one over there is a Honda, the mower, but the Kawasaki version is almost exactly the same. So we're not going to fiddle too much with these two because while they are important, this one's super basic. This one I would recommend just buying, and I'll explain why. So, first things first, what do you need? Take it off. I'm not going to explain how to do that because yours might be different. You need to take a 10 millimeter if it's OEM, and what I would do if I were you, I would type in your machine. Let's say it's a GCV 160. It will tell you that on the machine. Just go to the internet, GCV 160 rebuild kit. Now in that kit, you're going to get a couple things. You are going to get this for the nut, the little gasket, and more likely than not, this bowl gasket as well. Now, do you need it? No. Would it be a good idea to replace it? Yeah, or at least have it on hand? Yes, because even if you don't end up replacing it, if yours rips, that's a very important thing to have, and it's better to have one ready, that way you don't have to waste any time, than have your machine half apart for like 3-4 days. So order that first, have one on hand. So, inside here is a jet. You just take a screwdriver, take it out. Be very careful though, this is probably the trickiest part. Get a screwdriver that fits exactly in there. It's a flathead. Make sure there's almost no wiggle room. Pull it out, and that's it. There is an emulsion tube, which, if you can see in there, it's just like this tiny little brass tube that sticks out. Also comes out. Now, this is a part that can change. This one has a little screw here. This is for the idle part of the carburetor. You need to take that out. Sometimes they don't have a screw. They have like a black piece of plastic. And inside that black piece of plastic is a jet. It functions exactly the same. And this one, the jet is actually inside the carb. The black piece of plastic, it's in the black piece of plastic. It doesn't really matter which one you have. Like I said, the functions exactly the same. All you need to do, get a brush, wire wheel. If yours has this style, you shove that bristle in there. It's very, very small, so get a very, very small brush. You can even get a micro drill bit set, but we're pushing the specialty tools at that point, so we're not going to go down that road. This should work perfectly fine. The jet, same thing. It'll take it out, take the bristle, clean it out, make sure when you look through it's perfectly round. Same thing with the emulsion tube. There's a bunch of holes in there. Make sure they're clean. Slap it back in. I would maybe take like a compressed air if you have it, or if you don't have anything like that, a can of carb cleaner. Just know that you are going to try to avoid getting it on the gasket or the bowl gasket. Now let's say you need to take apart the float. A lot of people can get a little intimidated by this because this needle comes out. Now if you look at it, on the top there's a place that holds onto by the float. And the float itself has that little area to kind of hold it in place. So all you need to do is shove it in like that, and it's held in place. Then at this point in time, you can do whatever clean you need to do in here. Just be careful, like I said, and you're golden. To put it back on, hold it like this. Take the end of the needle. The needle goes in there. Let's back up. Inside there, there's a flat surface. Well, not really flat, but it should be very clean surface at the very least. If that is not clean, take a Q-tip, kind of cut it in half or not, put it into a drill, and just put it in there and drill it clean. Pretty easy. That needs to be perfect. Anyway, back to that. You just shove the needle in, and that's it. At this point in time, you just put your pin in. There we go. Golden. This bowl needs to be pristine, so make sure it is clean. There's no speck of dirt or anything. You don't want that. Staining is not a problem. Staining is fine. Staining is not going to plug anything. Staining just looks bad, but no one sees it, so it's okay. Same thing with the float. Needs to be very clean. Anyway, then when we're done, if you did rip the bowl gasket, this would be a time to put it back on. Then you just put this back on. If you got a kit and you want to replace the gasket for the nut, then go right ahead. And then you tighten it down with a hand tool. And there you go. If you do have a can of carb cleaning, which I recommend, no matter what, I would take this apart and spray it a little bit in there. You're going to see a little bit come out of the sides. That's normal. That's what you want to see, to be honest. Now, there is one other thing that I don't know if I'll be able to show you, but on Honda Carbs, down on the side, there's going to be tiny little holes. Now you need to take that same wire from the brush, take it out of the brush, put a little 90-degree bend in there, and you have to clean out those little holes. Not all of them have them. Some do, some don't. If you don't have them, then don't worry about it. If yours do, make sure they're all clean, and these should be fine. I would recommend, if you do have compressed air, to always boil compressed air in there just to wash everything out. So, like I said, I mean, how long was that? No time at all. Another thing, if you're going to be taking it off, I'd highly recommend getting a gasket kit. Like I said, if it says GCV 160 on it, just go to Amazon or eBay or wherever you want to go to. Type that in, you'll get a section of like 3 or 4 of them. More important is the one that actually mounts to the motor. If that one's broken any way, ripped, I don't care if you put it together perfectly, any way, it's a potential vacuum leak. You do not want that. So when you are replacing it, you need to clean the port on your mower or machine and clean the surface. Very carefully, don't mar it up, because you could be introducing another vacuum leak. And then put the gasket on, and you should be okay. So, I mentioned this one. Like I said, this is even easier. This one doesn't have it because I took it off, but that is a 1/2 inch. And then what you end up getting, if I can find one real quick here, is I'm starting to figure out why it's missing. Maybe I used it for something else. Yeah, well, this is for a different machine, but it's going to show us the same thing. So like I said, it doesn't look like this. It looks very, very similar, but it will do exactly the same thing. There are 2 holes on the side and 1 hole down the middle, and you need to make sure those are clean. Take the bowl off just as we did before. The bowl is exactly the same. Except, like I said, this is even easier. This is your jet. This emulsion tube does not come out. So like I said, even easier. All you usually have to do is take this out, empty out the bowl, clean them both, putting them back on. If you notice, there's nothing else. Majority of them will not have a single thing. It's just this little jet. Super easy. Clean the bowl, put the jet back in, done. That's how easy that carburetor is. Now the bowl gasket, if you do take it apart, even if it isn't ripped, I'd recommend getting a new one. They're usually some type of rubber. It's not that hard. If you have a primer on your mower, it's especially important. If you don't, you could get away with it. It might not run as good, you might run into problems, but it probably will be okay. But that's it. Really simple. The float is exactly the same. Everything. This is the one that you could really run into problems with. Let me explain why. It's a lot more complicated. Now, it's not to say it's impossible. It's actually not that hard in comparison to other carburetors in the world. I mean, I think personally, when people think I don't want to deal with carburetor, they think of these. There's like plates right here. There's a primer. There's this plastic part. There's a spring in there. It's super tiny. A lot of tiny stuff. That's understandable. I mean, if you own, this came off a weed eater. If you replaced your weed eater carburetor instead of cleaning it, I'm not going to fault you for that one bit. These can be a little tricky. This one, primer bulb is on it. You can replace them. You can buy them. They're not 100% foolproof of installing, but once you do it one or two times, you usually get a hang of it, and it's not too bad once you do. However, it still can be a little tricky. It does have a port outside. Sometimes there's a screw, sometimes there's not. You do need to clean that. With the exception of that, this is actually the jet that comes on a Tecumseh. Like I said, two little holes, hold down the center, except in addition to that, I don't know if you're able to see, there's a tiny little hole where my thumbnail is. You also need to clean that out. On the old machines as well, there's a few passageways for idling, and if they're plugged, they're plugged. You really do need some special equipment, or at the very least you might get lucky with carb spray, but that's it. And the only other thing that's really complicated is the float does have a special orientation to it, or excuse me, the bowl has to be put on exactly like this at an angle. So this line corresponds with the end right here. If you don't, then the float won't work right, and then you can start to flood over. That's it. But like I said, if you have a problem with the Tecumseh carbs, unless it's an old one, I would definitely just buy a new one. They're cheap, they're plentiful, they work great if they're aftermarket, they have time to get them right, and I rarely have problems with the aftermarket ones. They're not as easy to install in the machine. There's usually a lot more work, but you know, these are also fading away. I would kind of say if you have a Tecumseh carburetor, not only are they old, I don't think they made them after 2008, maybe earlier. Maybe they stopped before then, but it's probably getting pretty degraded, and new one would just be warranted anyway. So if you have a Tecumseh, you can clean it. The bowl gasket is also rubber. When you order a gasket kit, it will also come with a bowl or a nut gasket, and also will come with a seat. Remember the needle? Instead of on these two, excuse me, on this one, it will run. The needle will have a rubber tip. On these two, the needle is solid, metal, and it will rub or make pressure or contact with a seat, or a rubber seat. And what they look like on a Briggs is this. Briggs is a super easy one. Now, sometimes you don't have to replace them. Majority of the time you don't. If your float is at an angle, which by the way it should be level when you hold it upside down, then you do need to replace that. That one can be tricky. Getting like a wood screw, kind of twisting it in there a little bit and popping it out, or taking your air compressor and blowing through the inlet can also pop it out. You know, just don't damage the surface. If you damage the surface, your carburetor is garbage. So that's what this looks like. There's a smooth side and side with like a ridge on it. The ridge goes down. Same thing with the Tenkamzi, except I think they're white. So that's about it. Obviously, these two are not as detailed as that one. We didn't take that one apart. The reason why that is they're almost exactly the same minus the seat. Once you see one, you've seen them all. They're that simple. So don't be alarmed, don't be afraid, and don't consider that to be a restriction if you have a problem. And the majority of the time, if they're on the machine, all you have to do is take the bowl off and drain it. And there could just be water, and that could fix your problem. So you may not even have to take it off. So you may not even have to clean your carb. You just have to drain the fuel, and just by removing the nut or the bolt and let it dry out. Maybe take the bowl off, clean it out, put the bowl back on while it's on the machine, and you're golden. You still should carry that kit because you don't know if by taking the bowl off you're going to rip the gasket, but more likely than not with the Honda, that's not going to be a problem. Briggs, if it's old enough, it can get compressed and you should replace it anyway, so be aware of that. But other than that, cheap tools, cheap parts in comparison. I mean, you don't want to get the cheapest parts, obviously, but even the expensive ones aren't that expensive, so you can easily save yourself some money. And you know what, when you do stuff like that, it kind of makes yourself feel better, at least in my opinion it will. So I'm gonna leave it at that. If you were on the fence on either cleaning or replacing your carb for something simple and you think it was just like maybe some water, some loose debris or something like that, and this helped you out, put a thumbs up. That helps me out as well. I'll catch you on the next one. You have a good day.